Cheers, Paul. Thank you. Hey, guys. First of all, I just want to say that it's a nice venue to kind of present anything here. So thanks for coming. So yeah, as Paul mentioned earlier, well, I'll basically start by giving like an extended introduction, to be honest. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, we're from Token Lounge, but at the same time, we support we've built a fully fledged ICO platform that people can log in, they can use a very intuitive user interface, and they can contribute with various routes of payments, and all this whole system is backed by the underlying basically security principles of the blockchains that we use. The topic of today's kind of presentation is more about the concept of pools in the context of token crowd sales. I don't like to call it ICOs. I more of like try to call it like a crowd sale of something. So you would ask like, what's the benefit of a pool, right? And I think it's quite intuitive. If you go back like last year, and probably like this year, it was more obvious. You will realize that ICOs try to kind of allocate most of their tokens during the private sale or pre-sale. And the reasons are quite obvious, I believe. And so the ICO itself tries to give all the incentives possible to kind of make the majority of the sales during these stages. And I mean, you can understand like why is that important for them. So it's important for them because they kind of don't have the headache of chasing kind of investors to kind of fund their project. But at the same time, they expect people to give like good chunks of contributions in order to kind of get all those discounts. And the question is like quite simple, like how can I meet basically the requirements of the pre-sale? So the pre-sale might say, I'm gonna say like random figures, but the pre-sale might go like, you need to contribute at least 10 Ether to get 75% bonus. And obviously that kind of, it's a bit of, the entry level for the general public is not there, because like not many people might have like that amount of minimal contribution. So why don't we come up with an idea where we basically create a pool, which is nothing very innovative, but in the context of an ICO, creating a pool means that anyone can contribute even 0.05 Ether, but if you combine them together, you're going to reach like the minimum contribution that the ICO itself expects. And plus you get the bonuses. And as I mentioned earlier, like from the ICO point of view, this is a kind of, they have less headache, they don't need to go and chase investors, they let other people kind of, they keep other people incentivized to do their jobs for them in kind of exchange for a good discount or a good bonus. And the question is, how can we do that? In like, if I have a crowd sale for the X token, how can I create a pool? So the naive approach might be someone who is a person that understands about tokens, understands the area of like crypto currencies and the way that you trade cryptocurrencies. So that guy can literally create an Ethereum address, and anyone can just send their Ether to that address. And so when the soft cap is reached, for example, which is, when I say soft cap in the context of ICO pool, I pretty much mean the minimum contribution that is needed to get like the bonuses that are advertised. So when the soft cap is reached, you can essentially just, having that funds in your Ethereum address, you can just simply send it to the ICO. And the next step would be that you need to get the tokens back, right? And you as the pool manager, you'll have a bunch of tokens in your Ethereum account, and then you would need to go and distribute them to the contributors of your pool. And that process is, I mean, it's quite obvious probably for all of you what the potential problems might be. And one of the problems is that, first of all, how do I maintain the ledger? Like, if I got like 1 Ether from the X guy, where do I write it down? Where do I keep that information? Is it going to be an Excel spreadsheet? Is it going to be any other tool? It's not quite easy kind of to keep in pace, like if you have especially lots of contributions. The other thing is what happens when we don't reach the soft cap. So in a token crowd sale, if you don't reach the soft cap, there is a process that might last like a few days, but it's a process where you need to return all the contributions back to the participants of the crowd sale. And how would you do that? Like if the whole thing is a manual process, it's a bit tricky. And then, as a pool manager, how do I know that I've sent the correct tokens to each participant? I mean, it's definitely error-prone, and it is error-prone because it's a manual process, and any manual processes are error-prone. And finally, like the basic question is, if I raise like 100 Ether or 1,000 Ether in my Ethereum account, why would I, if I'm a dodgy guy, why would I really care about going and kind of sending that money to the ICO and distributing the tokens? So there is like a bit of, you're not too incentivized as an ICO manager to act like in a proper way. So it's essentially a question of trust, really. And as everything in blockchain it's all about trust. And the question is, how do we remove like the trust from this whole process? And I think the answer is quite obvious, and it's called smart contracts. And although I really disagree with the terminology, like I don't believe it's something very smart. It's just like a piece of code that runs on a decentralized system. But it does lead us to kind of remove this kind of question of trust. And how can we kind of use smart contracts to make the process I described earlier in a smoothest way possible? So what we can do essentially is create something similar to an escrow service or to a bank. So basically a guy that intrinsically you trust because you were born to trust them, but to do that in a way that the current technology kind of allows. And the current technology basically says that you can trust the code itself. And how would that work? So it's quite simple, actually. So all you need to do basically is to deploy a piece of code on a decentralized on a distributed system that is not that is baked with the blockchain technology. Let's take the example of Ethereum, for example. And all you need to do is supply the basic kind of requirements that any pool would need. So that might be like the soft cap, the hard cap, opening times, the exchange rate of the token, and anything, any other information that is relevant. And then the participants can still follow the same exactly process. Like the contributors, from the contributors' point of view, nothing changes really. They still have to send something somewhere. But the difference is that now we don't send it to an externally owned account on Ethereum, we just send it to a smart contract. And the smart contract itself will make sure that any contribution that's coming in is valid. And by valid, we mean the rules that are actually baked into the code and everyone can see them and everyone agrees with them. And if, for example, a contribution is not valid, for example, then what happens is that the smart contract is smart enough to instantly refund it. So you basically avoid the manual process of checking if something is valid or not. You can leave it to the code. I mean, the code, if it's written in the right way and in the simplest possible way, it can decide better than a human can, I believe, in simple scenarios like this. And then the contract itself has an internal ledger, so you don't need to keep like who has contributed how many tokens, how many Ether, and at any point, that's quite important for the investors, is that at any point you can, if you haven't reached the soft cap, which is the limit where you have kind of promised that what I've contributed should go to the crowd sale, if I haven't reached that point, then I can change my mind and I can withdraw my contribution. Why shouldn't I at the end of the day? And distributing the tokens it tends to be like a lengthy process, but with the current technology, I don't believe that should take very long, to be honest. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is, when you participate in a crowd sale, you participate in something that promises, you send some assets and there is a promise that you will get something else as an exchange. So in a token crowd sale, that's pretty much you get back some tokens and you send some Ether, for example. So that's a basic promise. And the ICO representative, who is someone from the ICO, from the blockchain project basically that runs the crowd sale, what it needs to do is basically fulfill the promise. And the promise is just sending the desired amount of tokens back to the smart contract. And the smart contract itself will realize that, okay, this pool here has raised, let's say, 1,000 tokens. Did I get the 1,000 tokens back? If I have done that, then the ICO representative can just go quickly and release the funds that were raised. So it's basically an exchange that happens without any human being kind of like actively participating in it. And finally, the end goal is obviously to get some tokens back. And the way it happens is that anyone that has contributed to the pool can just go and claim their tokens back. And the beauty of this is that you don't need to literally talk to anyone. It's just literally the code itself. And I do realize, like today, maybe when we say the code itself can decide, it's a bit, yeah, but not many people understand. But I don't believe that's the case, because in the future, people will really understand how this whole thing works, and it will be very intuitive to them. It's pretty much like nowadays we can type like www, but back in the days, you were like, what is www? So it's exactly the same kind of, the progress will be in the similar manner. So you would ask, what are the benefits of using a crowd sale? So first of all, as we mentioned earlier, the funds are controlled exclusively by the code, which is the smart contract itself. And you can only release the funds when certain criteria is met. And there's no need to manually process anything, and there's no reason to do that if you have a code that can kind of deal with that. Also, you can always refund your users in an automated way. You don't need to manually go and check the ledger, the balance sheets, etc. And the token distribution is done in an automated way again. So there's no human intervention in this entire process. And finally, that's something very important for the investors. And so if I have contributed something and my promise is not met, I need to have it's a requirement for me to be able to get my funds back if something is not delivered. And if you bake those rules into the smart contract, then that's quite easy to accomplish. And finally, if you want to protect your pool from, taxman or the regulatory bodies chasing you, you can literally apply whitelisting, which means like KYC, AML process, etc. And also, something which is very excited is that you don't really need to be restricted in having just one pool. And this is quite important for the ICO itself. So what you can do is essentially you can replicate the entire idea in something that is called a referral smart contract, which you can literally have out of one pool, you can have thousands other pools from people who can bring investors in, and everyone will get their stake, and the same rules apply for referral contracts as well. And okay, you would ask like, but okay, the smart contract is running somewhere, how do you interact with it? And the answer is pretty simple again. So it's something that is called DApp, whatever you want to call it. So it's basically a decentralized application, which the whole purpose is to have a user interface on a higher level and something that communicates with the blockchain in the middle layer and then the blockchain itself. And that usually comes as web-based applications nowadays, but in the future nothing stops us to have a mobile-based application that can communicate with the blockchain without having any server-side code that can essentially cheat if they want. And like an example would be something like this. So at the end of the day, all you need to know is the criteria of the pool, how much is raised, what is the rate, and have an input box there where you put your amount of contribution. You click on that nice purple button, and that's it. I mean, it should be as simple as that. You don't need to know the internal kind of technology of the smart contract to be able to kind of use it. Yes, and finally, what are the improvements? I believe there are so many improvements that can happen in this area, and I will briefly mention just two of them, but the possibilities are endless really. So one of them would be to have literally a pool that is not tightly coupled with a particular ICO, but more of a funding pool where the investor itself can, essentially at the end of the day, can send like, I don't know, 10 cents of a dollar every day to the pool, and at the end of the year they can go and say, okay, I want to spend 5% of my funds that I've contributed to this ICO, 10% to that ICO, and the whole process would follow essentially the same kind of, the same approach, a decentralized approach of contributing and getting back the promise that someone gave to you. And the other one, which I'm very fascinating about this technology, and I hope it will come out very soon. So I do believe in the blockchain, or in the cross-chain communication protocols. I believe that we can, nowadays, for example, if you want to contribute with fiat, you would need to have some sort of external kind of centralized service, unless you go through the Tether kind of fiat-pegged currency or whatever. But the end goal is really to have all blockchains communicating with each other. So the way that we can communicate with my local network and communicate with a network in the States, well, the same should happen in the blockchain itself. And when that happens, then we can really create smart contracts that can communicate with each other regardless of the technology that is used underneath. And that's it, pretty much. That's a good question. So the thing with this is that the idea of smart contract, at least nowadays, is to create something very simple that anyone can understand. So it's literally a piece of code that anyone who has the knowledge, and obviously anyone who wants to participate at some point will have that knowledge, can go and read all the rules of the smart contract. So the risk itself is as risky as you believe the code that you see is. So if you trust the code that you see, and you have members in your team that understand the code, and they say that what they kind of explain is literally what is baked into the code, then the risk is pretty much the risk of you knowing the technology or not. So in terms of that, yeah, it's literally all about technology. I mean, if you mean the risk of investing in something that might not have the returns that you believed, that's definitely something that from the technology perspective is not what we really need to think about from our side, to be honest. Yeah, so obviously the code itself, there is no perfect code. I mean, whoever says that there is a perfect code without bugs, that's a lie. But I like really about the blockchain technology is that we're trying to bring this awareness to the general public that they need to understand what the code is about. And the more we kind of involve people into this process, the better our code will be at the end of the day. So the short answer is there's no one that can promise you or give you guarantees about the code, pretty much. The thing with the regulations is quite vague at the moment, and I do agree with you that most of the most of the tokens are moving towards like to get like a nature of a security token. But in that case, it's all about adapting into the current regulatory scheme and just go with the flow. There's nothing you can do about those things, really. You cannot be rebels and just go into the streets and fight. So yeah, answering that question is pretty much you just follow what the regulations are. And the other part of your question was about whether someone is using. And as I mentioned earlier, we do provide, so our main kind of product is all about helping token crowd sales to make their crowd sale process as smooth as possible. And the pool itself is as an addition to this entire process, and it's something that gives them guarantees, basically, to know that most of the funds that are raised are kind of are raised in a secure way. So yeah, we actually use the tool. We do use it. Well, the pool itself is on Ethereum, yes. Well, the runner itself, so pool and runner comes like hand in hand. So the runner itself, unfortunately, at the moment, due to the lack of kind of cross-chain or wide accepted cross-chain protocols, we do have some elements of centralization, and that's pretty much like a hybrid approach that everyone follows nowadays. But in the future, what we're thinking about, again, when the protocols are in place, we're thinking about making the entire kind of system in a decentralized way. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the answer is pretty much similar to what I said earlier. So it's more of we do have people who have done that in the past in a very manual process, and it's pretty much like something that they required. And yes, the target audience is more of, I would say, the actual blockchain projects that want to raise some money. And this is more of like something we support as an additional service to kind of help them do. Yes, and what exactly, the thing you're kind of describing right now is the idea behind the referral contract that I mentioned earlier. So we can kind of create the smart contract, but we do have people that we can create literally like 100 other referral contracts, and they can bring the investments from different kind of routes. And at the end of the day, the real truth is in the actual, the main pool. Yeah, that's a good question. So the thing with PrimaBlog is more of the way we do this swap with between the money raised and the tokens itself. So our rules is pretty much in having, we can deploy, for example, a pool, but at no point we actually have control of the funds. So the only person who has control of the fund is the ICO representative. So it's someone who is very incentivized to deliver their promises, and it's not someone like third party who might kind of act in a not very incentivized for him way. So the way it works is that the pool itself, if for example I'm from an ICO and I know that the pool raised 1,000 Ether, and my promise was to deliver X amount of tokens, there's no way I can lie. And the only way to get those 1,000 Ether is just to send the tokens that I promised to do. And there's no human intervention in a sense that there's no one that can just go and grab the money and run away, pretty much.